I mean, I told my dad, hey dad, I want to start a car company. I'm like 10. He's like, that's a great idea. You should go for it.
CEO RJ Scaringe.
RJ Scaringe.
RJ Scaringe, CEO of Rivian.
RJ is the story of one kid's dream turning into a multi-billion-dollar reality.
You know, why do we exist? What's the purpose of the business? Why do we deserve to be a company?
If you want to understand RJ, look at his machines. They show the mindset of a builder who obsesses over every detail.
You had to make this trade-off. How were you able to achieve that without having the price be much higher than what it is?
In a perfect world, one brain would make every decision because then it feel really consistent. That sound is actually a modified bird chirp. Every little detail is to inspire you to go generate memories that will last for a very long time.
He's the founder and CEO of both Rivian and Mind Robotics. But today, we're diving deep on a rapidly changing world.
AI in the physical world, it's going to impact society more significantly than we probably realize. Not only hands off, but then hands and eyes off. Would be on your phone, reading a book. Imagine that every single car on the road, no later than early 2030s. How you behave when you're next to a semi is different than how you behave when you're next to a small compact car.
Do you not believe vision alone can achieve full autonomy? Humanoid robots.
The fastest animal on the planet is not a human, not even close. Chances are it's not going to mimic exactly the way a human looks for precisely the reason that a human's not optimal for that.
Are you optimistic and why?
Incredibly optimistic, but I do think we have to recognize that this is by far the largest and most rapid societal shift that we've yet seen as a species. The next 10 to 15 years are going to be the most important part of the history book. We create intelligence that is higher than humans. It is very hard to imagine what that means for society.
Hey guys, if you're familiar with my channel, you know that I'm always excited to break down the latest research paper, to test the latest frontier models, but today is different. I'm incredibly excited to talk to RJ Scaringe, not only because he was super nice, super smart, really a visionary when it comes to physical autonomy, but because I actually own a Rivian and I absolutely love it. And so this isn't just a tech interview. This is a look into how one of the most disciplined minds thinks about the future of physical intelligence. But before we get into the room with RJ, my analytics tells me that 60% of you watching right now don't subscribe to my channel. And so if you find value in my channel and all of the work that me and my team put into it, go ahead and click the subscribe button. It's free and it really helps us. And with that said, I'm so excited to go talk to RJ. Let's go do that.
RJ, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Super excited. So congratulations, hit a few milestones this past year, 2025. First full year of gross profit, 144 million. The R2 right around the corner. Driving down here, I saw a few of them on the road, camouflage of course.
Oh, cool.
Beautiful. And your 2026 delivery guidance up 50% year over year. So just wanted to give you a chance to really talk about that.
2026 is it's a super inflection year for us because we have a bunch of things coming together on the technology side. So our self-driving platform continues to get better and better. So that'll be on our Gen 2 R1 vehicles, which by the end of this year we'll be doing point-to-point, turn-by-turn. So you plug in the address and the car will drive you completely there. But then in addition to that, we're launching a whole new car with R2, and R2 is a mass market, high volume vehicle, starting price of $45,000. It is incredibly engineered. It's just such an amazing sort of condensed version of everything that is in Rivian in a smaller package, but without being any less for it. It's smaller, but the car is still so much fun to drive. It's still capable off-road. It still fits all your gear. It still has tons of personality. It still has a flashlight in the door. So I couldn't be more excited for it.
So I mentioned I have an R1S, and I've actually had multiple occasions where that flashlight has come in handy.
It's way more useful than people that
surprising.
Yeah.
Surprising.
There's many times you find you need a flashlight.
So I want to, before we get deeper into the R2, I want to talk about the origin and motivation for starting Rivian. Talk a little bit about that. I know you've told the story, but tell me what is it that you saw that was a gap in the market? What made you excited about starting probably one of the hardest businesses on earth to start?
Yeah, it's hard, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny, before we jumped on, we were talking cars. I've been a car enthusiast my whole life and grew up enamored with them. As I got older, started working on cars. I started restoring classic cars. And somewhere along that journey, I realized I wanted to start a car company. And amazingly, I told my dad, "Hey, Dad, I want to start a car company." I'm like 10, and this is like parenting lesson 101 for me. He's like, "That's a great idea. You should go for it." And help me think about like what are the things I would need to do to actualize starting a car company, rather than telling me like, "Good luck. That's a unlikely dream." And so ultimately worked as an apprentice machinist when I was in high school. I went to school from engineering. I did a degree in mechanical engineering. Then I went and did a master's and a PhD. Really with the clear focus of knowing that I wanted to start a car company. It would take a lot of money to start a car company. I don't have a lot of money. And so I thought a PhD would be helpful for raising capital. It was sort of like an accelerated way to demonstrate capability and to form some level of credibility for raising capital. That was my logic. But anyways, I started the company the day
Was
after.
that true? Did it help?
In some ways, yeah. In some ways, in not in unexpected ways, it was helpful. Well, I can talk about it, but I ended up starting the company the day after I graduated with my PhD. And at that point, the strategy was very different than what you see today. It's funny, like the idea was like building a car that was going to help reshape and rethink mobility. And the initial thought was, let's start with a sports car. And the logic wasn't wrong. It was use a sports car to build the brand, then with the brand, launch higher volume, more mass market products. And I worked on that for a couple of years until I started to really accept this feeling I had inside, which was that strategy had already been deployed. That was what Tesla did approximately 10 years earlier. Yeah. And so got to the view that we needed to have a major pivot and decided to completely stop work on that program and rethink the nature of what we were building. And it wasn't as if when we stopped work on this initial product concept that it was like we pulled out strategy 2.0 and it was like perfectly well written, everything was defined. It was more stopping the work on the initial concept and then reframing the question to say, why do we exist? What's the purpose of the business? Why do we deserve to be a company? And we realized the question we're trying to answer is how do we maximize impact? And through that lens, it led us to the realization that we wanted to create products that were not only highly desirable, but went into segments that you typically wouldn't associate with efficiency or with electrification, and completely redefine those segments in every way. So our launch flagship products, the truck and an SUV set, the R1S and the R1T, aimed to be incredible off-road and incredible on-road, really efficient, but also really comfortable and able to fit all your gear and of the size that you typically wouldn't associate like a big vehicle of that size with that level of efficiency. And to use those vehicles as the brand platform from which we would then launch more products, higher volume products. And the first of those higher volume products is this R2, which we're about to launch now. But the crazy thing is that this strategy and the brand took a lot of time to iterate and sort of think through. And it's now so clear. Like when I say, imagine a mid-sized Rivian SUV or imagine a small Rivian hatchback, you can sort of in your head come up with the idea of what that would look like because you know what Rivian is, you know what it stands for, our design language, how we approach product decisions, particularly you do as an R1 owner.
Yeah.
But in 2015, we didn't even know that. And so we had to figure out what's the texture of Rivian's brand and like went through many versions of that. In defining the texture, had us asking all kinds of questions. What would it feel like to sit inside of Rivian in this condition? Does a Rivian like chocolate chip cookies or broccoli? Like those kinds of really ethereal, deep questions that would then inform how we cascade the approach to taking decisions at a product level across the whole business. Anyways, it's a very long answer to the question of how I started the company, but it was born out of this enthusiasm for making something that didn't exist.
I can feel the enthusiasm throughout the product. It's the attention to detail that is really surprising. And I'm not just blowing smoke because you're here, literally bought the car, right? So when you call the service phone number, when you're on hold, there's nature sounds being
Yeah,
played. So it's
yeah.
like a lot of little attentions to detail that really shows the enthusiasm
Yeah,
behind
yeah.
it. All right, let's talk about the R2 now, because
Okay.
that is really like the special moment for Rivian. What does it actually mean for Rivian to start to produce a vehicle that is about half the cost of what the R1 is? And
Yeah.
what does it mean for the company first, and then we're going to get into some of the details.
R1, as I said, it was our handshake with the world. And it was designed as a flagship product. So it was intended to be something that would be a more expensive product to serve in that flagship position. And today it's, they sell really well. So it's the R1S is the best selling premium SUV, electric or non-electric, in the state of California, along with 5 other states in the US. And then it's the best selling premium electric SUV in the United States. But as just a premium vehicle, it's one of the best-selling premium vehicles in the country already, putting aside electric or combustion. But the price point's high, so the average selling price of an R1 is over $90,000, and so by virtue of that higher price point, it just limits the scale or the size of the addressable market. And the brand is so much built around this idea of both enabling people to do the kinds of things you want to take photographs of, but as importantly, inspiring people to go do those things. And so all those little design touches, and you lock the car, it's that sound is actually a modified bird chirp, and there's all like every little detail is to help inspire you to go do these things that you're going to generate memories that will last for a very long time. And so, and the way we think about it is the cars are they're this manifestation vehicle form of being adventurous. And so with that as a flagship, we said, how can we now condense that into something that's a smaller package, much more affordable price point, and by virtue of a price point that starts at 45, be able to address a much, much larger market. And it's worth noting that the average price of a new car in the United States today is over $50,000. So the starting price of an R1 is priced at less than what half the new cars purchased in the United States cost. You have thousands and thousands of decisions across the vehicle in R2 to optimize the cost, so how much it would take us to build it, but then also made content decisions that were more constrained than on R1. R1 has a really trick suspension setup. It's a electrohydraulic damping system that allows it to variable roll resistance, and so you can go really fast off-road, really fast on-road, tons of ground clearance adjustment, about 6 inches of ride height adjustment, which is like much more than anything else in the road.
The Neil feature is
when
nice.
you put it up really high, it's very high. When you put it down really low, it's really low.
Yep.
That takes a lot of cost in the chassis system to do that. R2 doesn't have that dynamic ride height adjustment. It has semi-active dampers, but they're not electrohydraulically linked, between the corners. So there's lots and lots of trade-offs like that we had to make to hit the cost. But the resulting package and the way it's come together, I think it's arguably one of the best cars in the world. It's really good.
And so a lot of those decisions, some of them may be more obvious, but there was probably a lot of more detailed decisions where you had to make this trade-off. And how did you still maintain the quality? There's something when you sit in a Rivian, you can really feel the premium quality.
Yeah.
Is that still in the R2? And how were you able to achieve that without having the price be much higher than what it is?
I mean, R2 feels so good on the interior, and the quality and the fit and finish. I mean, part of it is R1. That vehicle is architected where, like, a lot of the core big fundamental decisions on, let's say, the body structure, the chassis, the way the vehicle assembles, the sequence of activities to put it together, that was done in like 2017 to 2019 timeframe. The company was a lot smaller and a lot less mature, and we've learned so much since we launched that product. There's so many accumulated scars on our back, so to speak, around production ramp and cost optimization, just part optimization. And so in approaching R2, we took all those learnings, everything that we thought that was difficult, this could have been done more efficiently, and have embedded them into the vehicle in a way that allows us to get to still exceptional levels of performance on and off-road with a simpler architecture and really elegant execution, where we had the benefit of a much larger team to be able to optimize every single part. And the R2's, it's a smaller car, but it weighs more than 2,000 pounds less than an R1. And so if you were to compare it to other SUVs in this size category, it's actually lighter than a lot of gasoline alternatives, which is atypical for an electric car. But the chassis and the body structure is really still capable off-road. The body rigidity is higher than an R1, which is remarkable. So it's actually stiffer both in bending and in torsion. And it still has all the same incredible focus on safety. So all the passive safety features. So if the vehicle's in a collision, the R1S is the safest SUV to be in a car crash with. The R2 is going to be the safest SUV in this category of vehicles to be in a crash with as well. That's like a key focus for us as we develop them. It's one of the hardest parts of developing a car that I think very few people recognize is there's so many decisions. So it's, if you're developing like this glass or this table, there's, in terms of customer facing decisions, there's, there's like 3 decisions, but like on this table, there's probably 30 decisions. On a car, there's tens of millions of decisions. And so the way that you develop a product as complex as this, and it doesn't take 20,000 years, is you have a lot of people working in parallel. And so in the case of like an R2, you have like 5,000 people working at the same time on the same product, which, said differently, has enormous coordination challenges. How do you get 5,000 people to all make decisions in ways that seem very consistent? So that when you like open the front trunk or open the rear door, which of course are developed by different people, that feels like the same person did it.
Yeah.
And when you like adjust the mirror, which is another different person, different team, in fact, different sub-team, like how does that all feel consistent? Because in a perfect world, one brain would make every decision, because then it'd feel really consistent. You wouldn't have the challenge of, well, this team approached the set of trade-offs around cost, complexity, function differently than this team approached the same set of decisions. So to do that, we spend a lot of time aligning on how we make decisions, how we make trade-offs, and a lot of those big decisions get brought back into like discussion forums, and we'll say, well, let's approach it this way, and did we do it consistently in the back of the car as compared to the front of the car, or the side of the car, or the inside of the car, or the electronics, the wiring harness. So anyways, I think of vehicle development as like this orchestra of thousands of people working on a really hard problem at the same time over a 3-year period to develop this immensely complex thing that needs to feel like one brain made every decision.
It's interesting how much emphasis you put on consistency within such a vertically integrated company. And then you look at a lot of other auto manufacturers, many of their parts come from hundreds, maybe you could speak to thousands of different, but Rivian, even within the company, it's hyper consistent, consistency focused.
It is, as I'm a huge car enthusiast, I've been a fan of all different types of cars and the history of cars, but it is remarkable to me today when you get into a vehicle and you sit and look at the whole UI, the whole user interface, and you can pick out like 6 different font types that even like, it drives me crazy that that's not at least coordinated. But if you can't coordinate font types across your UI, especially if it's a digital UI and you can't coordinate font types, that's why everything just doesn't feel as thoughtful. Like the door opening feels different than the hood, because fonts is like falling off a log. That should be like, that's a very low bar.
You're also not getting weekly, bi-weekly software updates, because you have to write software that accounts for dozens of different software vendors.
Well, part of that is that you have like, the reason that happens, you have many different software vendors that are putting different things together, and
they all have to coordinate.
The person who did the infotainment is different than the gauge cluster, who's different than maybe the HVAC software platform, whereas within Rivian, it's all 100% in-house. So
let's continue talking about software, because what I tend to talk a lot about on my channels is AI, artificial intelligence, and autonomy is something that Rivian has been focused on for a while. So I want to get kind of what is the state of Rivian when it comes to autonomy? Let's start there.
AI in the physical world is going to be it's going to impact society more significantly than we probably realize, and more significantly than it's going to impact society through the surfaces we're seeing it today. So like writing, language models for writing images or videos. It's going to change like the way we think about white collar work in a huge way. But I think AI in the physical world is going to like reshape like huge parts of how societies function for thousands of years. And one of the first at-scale deployments of AI in the physical world, I believe, is going to be autonomous vehicles. It does influence a lot of how we think about the products, and the products can be incredibly desirable. They can still be things that you as a human operate, but increasingly over the next decade, I'd say even less, over the next 5 years, we're going to see levels of autonomous capability growth that in some ways are unimaginable. And the reason I say in some ways unimaginable is the rate of progress that's happening in physical world AI, specifically in autonomy, over the next 5 years will be dramatically different than it's been for the last 5 years. And there's a reason for that. There's a big shift in how we approached developing autonomy, which corresponds to the big shift we saw in what drove LLMs, which is the use of transformer-based encoding and the idea of using a neural net and an end-to-end trained model to represent the knowledge of driving, which now may seem self-evident or obvious that we should have arrived there, but that wasn't the case up until just a couple of years ago. And so when Rivian launched, the Gen 1 of R1 was a completely different self-driving architecture than what's in Gen 2. And just for the benefit of background, I'll describe it. But the early days of autonomy and up through early 2020s, the way the systems were developed, you'd have a perception platform at a minimum cameras and a maximum cameras plus radar plus LiDAR. And that perception platform would identify and classify objects. So it would see you as a person, identify you as a person, or classify you as a person. And then with all the objects, with a person, a car, a motorcycle, a bike, a dog, it would associate vectors to those objects. So acceleration and velocity. And those vector-associated classified objects would then be handed to a planner. And the planner was a rules-based environment that would be based upon human prescribed rules that defined the way you should behave around all those actors in the scene. And so the challenge with that system is it took a very large team to define how do you drive a car, to put that into code. And equally, it would be very sensitive to changes in the sensor set. It would be sensitive to changes in the environment. So the rules-based environment for driving in San Francisco would be different than would require tweaks to then drive in, let's say, New York or to drive in London. Which is different than how we as humans drive. If I grew up in Miami and you suddenly placed me in San Francisco, very different driving style, I could very quickly adapt my driving style to San Francisco. And so that's because I don't have a pure rules-based, I have a much of a weighted neural net that has a whole bunch of weights around how to behave and have a deeper understanding. And so I say all this because around 2022, it became clear that the model needed to change entirely, and everything that had been worked on prior to that on these rules-based approaches was sort of obsolete. And the new way to build a self-driving model would be, and is, to have a large data collection strategy and to use that data collection from deployed vehicles, which, by the way, requires you to vertically control all of your perception stack because it can't go through, you don't want any of those signals processed, you want the most raw version of those, to then feed into an offline training platform, essentially running a lot of GPUs to build what we call a large driving model. And that large driving model would be an end-to-end neural net representation of the understanding of driving. And the speed at which features are now developing from that, and we're seeing this firsthand. We had an autonomy day late last year, late 2025, just to demonstrate where we are and to show what the roadmap looks like. But our Gen 2 vehicles, which you have, they launched middle of 2024. We had no data flywheel because there's no vehicles in the field. And over the course of 2024 to 2025, we built enough vehicles in the car park to have a sizable enough data flywheel to start to train our model. The first real embodiment of that was what we now put into what we call universal hands-free, which is any road with a line the vehicle can drive itself on. And then this year we're adding point-to-point and full navigation overlays. So if you plug the address in, the vehicle will drive there. And then next year, not only hands off, but then hands and eyes off, which is a level 3 feature, which allows you to be on your phone, reading a book. And then beyond that, then it's level 4. And that's all going to happen in the next, hands off, eyes off is next year. And level 4 is right around the corner, which is sort of remarkable because we've been thinking about level 4 and we now experience it through a robotaxi, a Waymo. But to imagine that technology available on every single car on the road as early as late 2020s and certainly no later than early 2030s. It just changes the whole way you think about like car ownership. It's like I own a car, and like now all of a sudden my car can pick my kids up from school. It can go to the grocery store, pick up things for me. And as that's happening, of course, you have this whole other movement, which is, I think, robotics and highly dexterous, high reasoning capability robotics are going to start to do a lot of things that humans historically have only been able to do. But all that's happening in the next decade. Like the next decade is going to completely remap a lot of the way we think about the physical world, and one of the first embodiments will be cars.
Let's go back to how you're collecting data. You obviously have this nice flywheel because you have a fleet on the road, you're collecting that data. Is part of Rivian's strategy to use synthetic data? I'm not sure if you saw NVIDIA announced Alpha Mayo, open source stack, basically generating a bunch of synthetic kind of mileage. Is that something that Rivian's doing?
I think in the long term, I think synthetic data will start to play a bigger role, but the synthetic data still benefits from being informed from actual data. The way that we would think about like safety cases or test cases today is we can create perturbations of real data, so synthetic data, but we perturbate or we like modify what we witnessed in the real world. So a very simple example to visualize is the vehicle behavior on the highway when everybody's staying in lane is well understood and solved. But if two cars that are, one on your right, one on your left, both change lanes into you, that's it. We can create that case for easily and see how our model responds to that. And of course, train off of that and train off of how you should behave in that situation. But the way that we trigger data, I think this is something that's important. The cars are driving, our cars are millions of miles of data is coming in, millions and millions of miles. And not everything's interesting. Like driving on the highway with the behavior of what, like if you look forward, it's the same as what you did, the 5 seconds previous. There's nothing interesting there. And so we have a whole system that we've defined that finds interesting events and triggers off of them. And so the obvious ones are there. If you're in an accident, that's a triggered event. We take the data that happened before that and after that. If the vehicle has like an abrupt braking because something happened that was severe, we train off of that. But one of the ones I think is very interesting is while you're driving your Rivian, the model of what the vehicle would do, if it were in control, is constantly being compared to what you're doing as the driver.
Is that happening on device?
Yes, so imagine you're driving and the model's running in parallel, and if you do something that the model didn't think you were going to do, like let's say you change lanes and the model didn't think you needed to change lanes, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And on a one-off case, it's interesting, but when you multiply that across, today on our R1 fleet, thousands and thousands of vehicles. With R2, this will be millions of vehicles, so driving many millions of miles every day, you can start to build a very robust understanding of how humans behave and start to build human-like driving feel and characteristics, which is often an interesting thing. Like if you're a human driver, there's a lot of work goes into this, is like how you behave when you're next to a semi is different than how you behave when you're next to a small compact car, even if the space is identical. And which is, like you think about it mathematically, there's no reason for that, but there's a desire to be a little bit a little bit further over in the lane. But those are things we now learn through our fleet, and we can train the models to behave in a very humanistic way.
Interesting.
Which makes you more comfortable as an occupant. And so anyways, come back to R2. The R2 vehicle and its perception platform was designed, one, to enable a very high ceiling on what the vehicle can achieve. So it's got 65 megapixels of cameras.
Didn't I see LiDAR?
Yeah, it has a LiDAR.
I want to talk a little bit about that in a moment.
Late this year, after the launch version, but we have a version that where every vehicle will start to come with LiDAR. We have a very high level of compute. We built an in-house inference platform, in-house chip that runs that. It's an 800 TOPS chip, so it's a very, very powerful chip. But we created all this headroom so the features can grow well beyond what they have at start.
Yep.
But we also designed it as a data acquisition machine. And so every vehicle in our fleet is part of a ground truth fleet to help train our models, train our simulations, create a better framework for even thinking about synthetic data. And that's all designed into the R2 fleet to help us. Our goal is to be one of the earliest providers of level 4 on a broad basis where like you buy a car and it comes with level 4.
Let's stick on the sensor strategy for a minute. You mentioned R2 will have LiDAR. Why did you decide to go with LiDAR? Tesla, obviously, famously, is going with vision only. Then you look at Waymo, which is probably the best autonomous driving vehicle on the road, uses a whole plethora of different sensors, including LiDAR.
Yep.
Why did you go with LiDAR? Do you not believe vision alone can achieve full autonomy?
The LiDAR questions become really charged, and it's not clear why. And let me explain why I say that. 10 years ago, a LiDAR would cost, depending on which one, like if you had a 64-channel LiDAR, it was like a $30,000 sensor. Now, a high-performance, long-range LiDAR, you can buy for a couple $100. So it's by far not the most expensive part of a self-driving system. This is the most expensive part in a self-driving system is the brain. It's the inference platform plus the entire compute platform necessary to support that. So all the associated memory, and all of that consolidated onto a big PCBA, the cooling systems to support that. That's by far more expensive than the perception stack. Because perceptions become highly commoditized. I mean, radars are tens of dollars, cameras are tens of dollars, LiDAR are low hundreds of dollars. We have to recognize that that's no longer the reason. And so on a model that's trained end-to-end, you actually benefit from having multiple sensors. It's why we don't have one camera or just two cameras like two eyes like a human would have. You have, in our case, we have 65 megapixels of cameras, so across the car's 11 cameras as part of this platform.
Yeah.
And it allows you to look long range in front of you. You can look behind you, off the corners, so coverage, there's no blind spots. And in fact, in some areas we have multiple redundant coverage. Now, as helpful as having redundant coverage and a high number of pixels to capture nuanced events that may be happening far off in the scene. And by the way, designing the cameras to have a very broad dynamic range, so great performance in low light, great performance in bright light. There are conditions that are beyond its dynamic range. And so in extreme bright light conditions, a camera actually fails to be a great way to discern between objects. And of course, in very low light conditions, it's hard to see, not too dissimilar from our human eyes. And so radar is great for object detection. It's incredible for seeing binary, is there an object there, yes or no? And so that's a very helpful part of the system. But the LiDAR is particularly helpful if it's not occluded, if it's not blocked by another car, for seeing in a very precise way things in no light conditions or bright light conditions, fog conditions. It has it's a non-overlapping strength with the camera. And so that's absolutely helpful for certain corner cases from a safety point of view. The part that I do think is missed here is when you have this LiDAR debate, is that with LiDAR cost being as low as it is, it's incredibly useful for training your cameras. So on a vision-heavy system, imagine we're vision-based beings, so we see the world through our eyes. And it takes you a while to learn objects. So if you see a little white dot off in the distance, because we've accumulated all this experience in our lives, we can make a prediction as to what that little white dot is because we see the surrounding stuff around it. Like the white dot I'm looking at now, it's a handle on a locker, but if I didn't know that the locker was there, I wouldn't know there was a handle on a locker. It just looks like a white dot. But with a LiDAR, you can really quickly start to train the cameras what all these very hard to discern things are off in the distance. It becomes very helpful we call it a ground truth, part of a ground truth fleet. So every company, by the way, inclusive of Tesla, you just have to go stand on El Camino or Pageville and you'll see a bunch of Teslas drive by. They're around the corner from here with LiDARs mounted on them. It's part of their ground truth fleet for training models. And so if you can put this on everything, it's a really important mechanism for us to accelerate how fast we're training our brain, how fast we're training the model. And we don't have a fleet that's nearly as large as Tesla. We'll have the second largest fleet in terms of building a data flywheel, second to Tesla. But Tesla's got a huge fleet. But so our approach is we have to catch up with and compete with Tesla. And so we're going to have more cameras with better dynamic range. We're going to supplement that with LiDAR that provides better safety case for edge case conditions and allows us to train the vision models faster. And the incremental cost to do that is relatively small. And in fact, any of the incremental costs that would have been there on its own is offset by the fact that we brought inference in-house and reduced the cost of our inference platform so dramatically from what we have in your car. Your car uses an NVIDIA inference platform. I say all this because in like the infinite long-term, you could make the case that once the models are very, very robust, you could have less cameras or you may be able to get away with less radar. It's not clear yet if that's the case for covering all these corner cases. I'd say it's unknown, but it's, in our view, it's very clearly accelerates the rate of progress for training the model, and it very clearly allows us to deliver features, level 4 features. So level 4 is the car can operate empty. Level 3 is the car can operate without the human driver participating. So you can like be on your phone reading a book, not paying attention to the road at all. It allows us to get to those level of capabilities faster. But it's hard to say in 2045 or 2040 or 2038 if we may be able to optimize sensors. I think the big question is how well we can cover the corner cases. Very important point. We're talking about safety. And so a car that is twice as good as a human is going to crash very rarely. A car that is 10 times as safe as a human is going to also crash very rarely. So in most cases, they look the same. But if you're a customer and you're say it's going to cost an extra $50 for a few extra sensors, you're probably going to decide to say, I want to cover every corner case, and I'm willing to spend a little bit incrementally more for that additional safety. And the best evidence of that is existing human behavior, which is passive safety systems, so airbags. So you can pass FMVSS and you can pass all your required safety standards with probably 2 airbags in the car. But if you were to go look at the cheapest car you can buy in the United States, it probably has 8, more likely 10 airbags in it today. And so what's happened is customers have said, they've spoken with purchase behavior that, yes, I could go buy a 2-star safety car and it does pretty well in a few collisions, but I'd rather spend a few $100 more and have 10 airbags versus 2 or 3. And so I think that will likely be how things play out, that we just biased, and once we start to measure safety, which is number of incidents per 1,000 miles or number of incidents per million miles, you're going to see more and more folks just recognize the benefits of sensors that have non-overlapping strengths and weaknesses.
Like as we continue to think about autonomy and safety, and because they go hand in hand, do you think that as cars become much more capable, much more autonomous, we're actually going to see less cars on the road? You described the situation in which you drop your family off, the car goes and picks somebody else up, and we have almost 24/7 utilization of vehicles. Does that mean less cars on the road? And then the obvious next question is, how does that affect Rivian's business?
This is a great debate we have all the time. So you have 2 competing trends. So as we move towards vehicles that can increasingly drive themselves, a household that has 2 or 3 vehicles can go down to 1 or 2 vehicles. In theory. And so that's the case to say that the car park will actually shrink because utilization of the vehicles goes up. But the other thing that happens is the vehicles can increasingly drive themselves, people will drive more. And
is that Jevon's paradox at play?
So you have people that people that'll decide, I work in Palo Alto, but I'll commute from Mill Valley. I don't mind the hour drive anymore because I can be in my car and on my phone. My view on this continues to evolve. I used to think the car park would shrink. I now think it's probably going to balance out. And I think probably a bigger factor here, because of the wealth levels that exist in the United States, when you look at like the number of cars owned per person in the United States, it's over 700 cars per 1,000 people. It's by far the largest in the world. We've culturally grown accustomed to having vehicles in our lives. And so what does that translate to? It's like car seats are in the car, your gym bag's in the back, the spare pair of shoes is in the trunk, you've got soccer balls in the back, you've got a basketball in the rear seat, like all these things, your life sort of moves into the car. And I don't think, 95, to put this differently, there's 10 trillion miles driven on the planet, 3 trillion miles are driven in the United States every year. 95% of the 3+ trillion miles driven in the United States are in cars that are owned by the household, meaning taxi plus rental plus rideshare represent less than 5% of the miles driven in our country. So maybe that grows to 10%, but I think more likely most people still desire to own the vehicle, even if it's driving them themselves, even if it's a level 4. And so I think that what we'll see more of is like three car households become two and 2 car households become one. But then I think others may just start to drive longer distances, which has that balancing effect.
You kind of described the car becomes almost like the second house, your second piece of real estate. You have your bag, you have your car seat. Do you think people are going to be comfortable? I think Tesla's vision is you're going to buy your car and potentially lend it out, earn some revenue from that. Do you think, how realistic do you think that is? Is that part of Rivian's vision?
If 5% of the miles traveling in the United States are in things you don't own today, or about that, a little less, maybe that becomes 10, maybe that doubles, maybe it becomes 20, it quadruples. But I don't think it increases 20x, meaning I think societal behavior around, because we have the wealth levels in our country to afford owning a vehicle, people will choose the convenience of not having to move car seats and the convenience of, not everyone, I think particularly in urban environments where people already are not accustomed to owning a car, like highly urban environments like in New York City or downtown San Francisco, it may shift, but I do think ownership will largely look the same, but I don't know.
Yeah.
And it actually doesn't. In some ways, this is what makes it so exciting. The level 4 technology we're developing, whether car ownership shrinks and rideshare grows, far more than what I've described here. So, we go from 95% of the miles driven in our country being in personally owned assets to, let's say it's 5%, to make an extreme example. That's okay. Like from the business model point of view, it just means you're selling transportation. So instead of selling, today the mechanism to consume transportation is to own an asset. To own a car. That's the primary mechanism to access mobility. If that shifts to a rideshare, or if that shifts to some sort of a flexible lease, or you can imagine your neighborhood has 10 cars and your whole neighborhood has access to them, like these unique models that a lot of people start to think about, that's okay. It's actually very important to be flexible to allow for those different business models, but it doesn't mean it's the end for companies that produce cars. The cars you still need the miles. And that's the part that the balance to all this is, I think miles traveled will grow. And so there's a bunch of people in academia who study this. Some say we're going to go from 3 trillion miles in the United States to 5 because of the dynamics I just talked about, but it's hard to say. And so if the number of miles grows, the actual size of the business, the total addressable market, if you will, is going to expand with it.
I want to change topics a little bit. You had mentioned humanoid robots earlier. I want to talk a little bit about that. Obviously, you probably heard Tesla is, kind of canceling the Model S, the Model X. They're shifting that manufacturing over to creating the Optimus. Rivians right now are essentially driving robots, and as they become more autonomous, they will increase in that perception.
Yeah.
The short of it is autonomous robots in general, part of Rivian's future, humanoid robots?
I launched another company last year called Mind Robotics. And the purpose of Mind is to develop robots with human-like skills for manufacturing, for industrial applications. Like, I'm quite bullish on robotics becoming a really key part of our society in terms of essentially how we run the planet. A lot of the things we today do as humans, can be done by robotics in ways that take jobs that are hard to employ, where attrition rates are very high, where there's safety risks with those jobs, or where there's just not interest in doing those jobs. I think you're going to start to see automation in a variety of different ways enter into this. When I say a variety of different ways, there are many mechatronic embodiments that will start to fill these tasks. One of which could be like something that mimics the biomechanics of a human directly, so like pure humanoid. But I think more likely, and with more imagination, we're going to see a lot of different robotic form factors. Really good example, in a manufacturing environment, the work that's being done is being done with hands. So everything else on the robot, this is like what the focus of Mind Robotics is, everything else is just to get the hands to the right place. And so being, for example, bipedal, like having 2 legs, is useful as a human to navigate an environment that includes stairs and curbs and grass and walking over trees and logs. But in a manufacturing environment, your movements are limited to a flat floor. If you were to look at like a Rivian plant, 95% of the work occurs within a 10-foot radius. So you're not moving very far. And so the complexity introduced with legs, both in terms of energy consumption, in terms of balance, and in terms of cost, which is really important in manufacturing, versus, let's say, a tractor wheeled base, is quite high. I think what we'll see is, and you're starting to see some of, as you look at robotics beyond just pure humanoid, I think we're going to see more diversity in robotic form factors. That's not to say that the robots don't have reasoning capabilities that are similar to a human in certain tasks, or have dexterous capabilities that are similar to a human, but they don't have to directly replicate the form factor of a human. And maybe a great way to think about this from a biological point of view is the human form factor has allowed us, and we've evolved to this over a long, like a lot of time, millions of years, we evolved to like what we look like today. The fastest animal on the planet is not a human, not even close. The fastest running animal on the planet is not a human. And the biomechanics of the fastest swimming animal and the fastest running animal are entirely different than the biomechanics on a human. And so if you were to build a robot to be very good at specific skills, let's say manufacturing, chances are it's not going to be like mimic exactly the way a human looks, for precisely the reason that a human's not optimal for that.
Why do you think there is such a push right now and investment into robotics, whether it's Tesla's Optimus, Figure? We see a lot of Chinese humanoid robot companies.
I think it's right. I think the investment is right. I'm just calling out that I think
there might be more variety.
There's going to be a lot more variety. Yeah. There's a lot. We're going to have, I think humanoids, there will be use cases for them where they're very generally applicable to many, many things. Since we talked about self-driving, this is an interesting one. If you think about making a robot to drive people around, the one way to do that is to make a robot that looks exactly like a human and sits in the driver's seat and actuates the pedal, turns the steering wheel, shifts the car into gear. Another way is to, which I think is a much better way, is to mount perception around the periphery of the vehicle on the outside of the vehicle as opposed to the inside of the vehicle, and to have the actuation of, let's say, the brakes and the controls not have to happen through something that has a lot of lag, which would be your arms and your legs, but happen electronically. I think we can easily see an autonomous vehicle as a robot, but it's not like we didn't start that by saying, let's make a human form factor that drives our cars. Now, science fiction has shown us differently. Like if you remember Running Man with Arnold Schwarzenegger, they had the Johnny Cabs, and the driver of the cab was like this little humanoid thing.
Yep. I was thinking exactly that as you were describing, like just let the vehicle drive itself versus a humanoid robot behind the wheel.
So that's an example of where I think we've had the imagination to think of designing the perception on an automotive or automobile robot very different than a human perception stack. Drones is another good example. Like you could make a drone by having a human fly a plane, or a humanoid fly a plane, or you can make the plane fly itself. So I think in manufacturing, if you need arms with hands to do things that humans do with a lot of dexterity, it can look human-like, but it doesn't need to be exactly like a human.
I tend to be very optimistic about the future, but we're describing self-driving vehicles, we're describing humanoid robots, large language models doing a lot of what white-collar jobs and knowledge workers do today. First, are you optimistic about the future? There's a lot of fear about job loss and automation. Are you optimistic, and why?
Incredibly optimistic, but I do think we have to recognize that this is by far the largest societal and largest and most rapid societal shift that we've yet seen as a species. I don't know why we're here, but we're just lucky enough to happen to be alive in this moment. But if you look at human history go back 40,000 years, you can imagine in history books 10,000 years from now, we're going to have like a bunch of things. There's like the Dark Ages, and a bunch, like hundreds of years go by, and it's a paragraph in a history book. The next 10 to 15 years are going to be the majority of it. It's like the most important part of the history book. It's when we create intelligence that is higher than humans and able to actuate things to levels that humans can. Intelligence both in the LLM sense, but also intelligence in the physical world sense. And it is very hard to imagine what that means for society. I think a simple way to think about it is today the planet has more than 8 billion people on it, and it takes about 8 billion people to run the planet the way we run it today, meaning to make enough food, to make energy, to run all of the services that we consume ourselves. We will need less people to run the planet than live on the planet in the long term. That is both challenging, but it's also an opportunity. It means you can have more time with your family. It means you can spend time on things you're curious about. And so I just had a really long conversation with a very close friend of mine last night on this, and I think one of the most, I have 3 kids. I have a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 7-year-old. I think one of the most important things that we as society need to focus on is rethinking how we approach education and thinking of it through the lens of inspiring and really enabling and driving curiosity. Like, because the skills that we used to think, like, if like growing up, parents would be like, you know, become an engineer, or like you would think of like these jobs that would be sure ways to generate an income and had market value. A lot of those jobs are just changing so rapidly that I think the most important thing, like for when I think about my own kids, is being curious, being willing to ask questions, challenge, understandings of how the world works. And that's very different than how we teach, our kids today. And so I do think we're going to see a tremendous shift in how we approach education. I hope it happens fast. I think it needs to move pretty quickly.
Do you think this transition is going to happen faster than society can keep up? I mean, if you're optimistic, maybe not, but I want, like, what do those timelines actually look like?
I think it's going to happen fast. I think the other thing that we need is, just a couple of years ago, like early 2020s, voice tools, if you were to use something like an Alexa or a Siri, they were very clumsy. And you wouldn't think to ask relationship advice to Alexa, or you wouldn't think to ask medical advice to Siri. You wouldn't say, like, I have this weird cut, here's a picture, tell me what it is.
Yeah.
Now that's becoming so expected. And we're in like the first pitch of the first inning of this. I mean, we're like 3 years in, 2 years in. It's very early. And so the rate at which the models are improving and the rate at which the models are helping themselves improve, it's just hard for our brains to imagine how much will change. And so that's why it brings me back to, I think, for those with kids, like, embrace curiosity, embrace the idealism that comes with being a kid, that like curiosity to dream, the willingness to imagine the unimaginable. And then I think for like the way the world, like the way society runs, this is a really hard topic, but I think we need to, like, our elected officials and politicians around the world need to think in very different ways than we have been. And I think it's going to require a level of empathy and thoughtfulness as we navigate these changes. I mean, take the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution started in the 1850s, roughly, and it played out until like the 1920s, 1930s. So it took an entire generation, maybe a generation and a half, to go from a world where a significant majority of the GDP was in growing food or making things in your own house, like building your own products and selling them, to the idea of corporations and the idea of industrial scale. But that took place over, somewhere between a half a century and a quarter, 3/4 of a century. This is taking place over a period of a decade, and the implications are even bigger.
Yeah.
And so it's not something that is going to stop. It's going to happen. I think it's important it happens with companies and leaders of companies that are like have a altruistic motivation to improve the world. And I think our governments need to be thinking very seriously around how some of the basic functions of society are going to need to be rethought. Everything from the way we approach healthcare, to the way we approach education, to the way we approach retirement, and like entire ways of like thinking around the economic system are starting to shift. And so I'm hopeful that we also have a lot of smart people thinking about this. I'm thinking about it primarily from the technology point of view. I think a lot of the academics that are starting to think about, like, how do we remap how we run society in this very different future, it's going to be important.
RJ, thank you so much. Yeah. Really appreciate the time.
Yeah, thank you.
This video right here is a personal recommendation from the YouTube algorithm. It uses some crazy AI to look at everything you've clicked on in YouTube, all of my videos that you may have liked, and try to determine the best possible video that you may like. And this is it. This is their recommendation. So click on it and let me know what you think.